talking for the last couple of weeks about how sometimes in life we just got to go through stuff. And sometimes we might believe that because I'm a follower of Jesus, I should get a pass on this thing, a whole just exemption from difficulties in our life. But we find out even when we follow Jesus, we don't get exempt from the difficult things in our life. So we ask this question, if there's a God, why do we have to go through stuff? Why do the bad things happen in life? And can we just be honest, all of us in this room, it doesn't matter if you're a Jesus follower or not a Jesus follower. I don't know where you are. You might be watching us online. You might be in the house today, and maybe you're just kind of exploring the whole Christianity thing. You're not sure where you want to jump in. That's just totally good. But let's just be honest. Some of the difficulties that we get into in our life, we chose our way to those destinations. Let's just take responsibility where we need to take responsibility. If you are in credit card debt up to your eyeballs or even higher than that, let's just be honest, we chose our way to that. If we're in a bad relationship, we probably chose our way into that. If it was a one-night stand with regrets to follow, we chose our way into that kind of stuff. If there's an addiction, we chose our way into that. We're in a culture and a society that doesn't necessarily want to take responsibility for that, but let's just be honest. We're the ones responsible for our own choices. Nobody makes them for us. So we don't need to address that this morning. That's coming up next week in our new series on the book of James. You're going to love that one. So anyway, but today we want to step back and say, what about when there's stuff that comes into our life that we did not choose? It chose us. Because all of us in this room, it's like we're trying to do stuff right, live right, be right, and it really doesn't matter. Sometimes the catastrophes and the disasters just come to our life. We didn't choose them, but they chose us. I mean, there are times when we choose pain in our life, and we will choose pain in our life if we think it is worth it. Some of you in this room make me sick because you're weightlifters, right? How many know every time I stand up, I'm lifting weight? Are you with me on that one? Okay. In fact, tonight you can see I'm going to lead you in the new exercise program that I have developed. We're going to do it down at the Ark tonight. It's a new exercise program. I think you're going to like it. We're going to step into the swimming pool, pull the plug, and fight the current. Okay, there you go. So anyway, but some of you elect for pain. You know, I'm just imagining some of you have a tattoo. You elected for that pain because you thought that pain was worth it. Some of you have a piercing. And you elected for the pain of a piercing because you thought that was worth it. I don't know about you, but me, anytime a sharp object comes towards me, I kind of have an aversion to that, right? But you'll lay on the table and have a little needle go into your skin 100 trillion times because you think it's worth it. Or maybe just once for the piercing because you think it's worth it. We elect for certain kinds of pain. Every time Robin and I go out to Los Angeles, we go, this is crazy. Why would anybody want to live like this? You drive on a packed freeway. You get to a packed store and you wait in line and you just wait in line everywhere you go and it says people, people, people. And then every time we go, I go, well, why would people live like this? And then later on in the day when we're along the beach, I go, I think I know why people live like this. They will elect that kind of pain and that way of living because of the benefits that go along with it. And so there's times when we elect for that pain. If pain makes sense to us, we'll endure it. But it's the random pain that comes into our life that we just go, I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I don't want to endure this. I thought about this morning. I thought, I could bring a hammer here. In fact, there's one just not too many feet from me in a special room over here. And I thought, you know what? I could have a volunteer come up here. I could have Randy come up here and say, Randy, would you allow me to use this hammer and hit your thumb as hard as I wanted to for $1? And Randy, I just want you to know something. I've hit my thumb for a lot less than $1, okay? And Randy might go, Pastor, I'm good. I'm really good. I believe in healing, but I'm good. Don't need the $1. But if I said, Randy, okay, let me sweeten the deal. What if I could hit your thumb with a hammer as hard as I wanted to for $5? I mean, we've just gone up 500%, like $5. Would you let me hit your thumb with a hammer for $5? And Randy would probably say, Pastor, I love you, but you just go right on ahead and beat somebody else with that hammer for $5. But what if I said, Randy, for $100,000? Randy might think a little bit more about it. For $100,000. Because if it's a sweet enough deal, I'll endure the pain. And again, if we elect for the pain, we'll do it. But let's talk for a little bit about the pain that we don't elect. And sometimes things happen in our life where we say, God, why? That's our prayer right there. God, why? In fact, maybe we don't even use the word God in our prayer. We just say, why? And when something happens in our life, we start to say, why? And we're trying to figure things out. Isn't it true? At least for me, we start to go through a kind of a tape recorder in our head. We start going back and all this stuff. Did I cheat somebody? Did I lie to somebody? Did I do something wrong to someone? Did I look at something wrong? Did I do something bad? Is this punishment from God? Is this why this is going on in my life? We're always looking for a context for the pain. Because if I know why I have this pain in my life, okay, I can endure it. I don't like the pain, but if there's a reason for the pain, like God, if this is punishment for something I did wrong, okay, I'll go through it. If there's a reason, I'll do it. So what I want to do this morning is try to help you understand that when, not if, when, we go through the most painful things in our life, there's a context for it, that there's a reason for it. Now, if you get caught up in trying to answer the question why all of the time, you're just going to get frustrated. Because this is one of the most challenging things it is for me to stand in front of you as a pastor. I want to pastor you. I want to give you the theological answers. I want to help you through the stuff of life. But if you get caught up in that why question, I can't answer the question why. I wish I could. And sometimes the reason that we go through difficulties in life is because we behaved our way into the difficulties. We chose them. We just got there on our own. But there's other times we just go through hard stuff, and I don't know why we're in the middle of those things. So after you hear this message today, you're probably not going to feel a whole lot better about the pain you might be suffering right now, but I want to help you get through the pain that you're going through right now. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe you haven't really fully involved yourself in a relationship with Jesus yet. Look, I can only imagine the amount of pain that you're going through right now, or you have gone through, or will go through. Because all of us face those situations in life. Because you're trying to get through this on your own. But if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus today, let me just help you through the pain that you might go through and say, you know what? There's going to be struggles and difficulties and challenges and disappointments and discouragements. And when we're a Jesus follower, suddenly when we start to follow Jesus, we can kind of put pain into a context and go, you know what? I know there's something better ahead for me. I want to help you understand that there's a context for the things that we go through. I think if you're not a follower of Jesus, at least this was my discovery before I began to follow Jesus, life was just hard. It was just difficult. But when I found Jesus, suddenly it wasn't only difficult, I had a hope that I hadn't had before. And that's the difference. And so what I want you to understand is that everything that we go through in life, all the difficulties, understand this. There is a beginning to it. There's a meantime. That's when you're in the middle of it. And then there's an end. The beginning and the meantime and the end. And what I want you to understand is sometimes in the meantime, it's a meantime. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it goes. And there's a guy named Paul that kind of gives us some context to some of these things. And he's writing a letter to a group of Christians in Rome. This is a couple of thousand years ago, but understand that the difficulties that we feel, at least internally, are not any different today than they were back then. There's still ups and downs in life. There's discouragements and disappointments and heartaches and relationship difficulties, and people died back then, people die today. There's just all the same stuff about humanity then and now. And Paul writes a letter trying to encourage the church on a whole variety of topics. And about the middle of the book of Romans, he kind of pauses here for a little bit, and I think he wants to give context to the difficulties that we go through in life. So if you brought a Bible, we're going to be in the book of Romans today. It's in the New Testament part of your Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, and then Romans. We're going to be in Romans chapter 8. And in Romans chapter 8, beginning in verse number 18, he starts out this topic like this. He says, what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory that is going to be revealed to us later. Do you see the time contrast here? He's talking about right now. This is the meantime. Right now is nothing compared to what we're going to see later on. There's a contrast. There's now and there's a meantime, and then there's going to be this end. And he admits right away, he says, look, can we just be honest? In the meantime, while things are going on, there are difficulties, and we suffer. We suffer heartache, we suffer loss, we suffer disappointment, we suffer discouragement, we suffer physical illness, we suffer breakups in relationships. We just suffer through all of these things. Life here is hard. That's probably the only thing I might say that all of us could agree with. Life on this earth can be really, really hard. And if you don't think it's hard, just turn on your news, get your news feed, or talk to the person next to you and hear what's going on in their life right now. He goes on to say in verse number 19, look, now he's talking about first us, and then he gets into this thing about creation. Look what he says in verse 19. All all creation is waiting eagerly for that future day when God is going to reveal who his children really are. In other words, he's talking about a future event now. He says in the future, there's going to be a day when Jesus comes with a great big bus and he picks up all the kids and he takes them home. That's going to happen for us. It's a future glory. It's going to happen in the future. He goes on to say in verse number 20 about creation, against its will, all creation was subject to God's curse. Now, let me just pause right there for a little bit. There's two characters that we read about at the beginning of our Bibles. I don't know if you've heard of them or not. Their names are Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve chose to rebel against God's laws and God's precepts and principles, and when that happened, sin entered the world. And Paul in this verse right here says, not only were people affected by sin, all creation was affected by it as well. I've, in my mind at least in that moment, when they ate of the fruit and rebelled against God, there was this resounding shockwave that started in the Garden of Eden and just went boom, and it went through the entire universe. And everything in creation was affected by the fall of man. He's going to talk about it a little bit more in the verses that we read here. But I want you to know that creation before the fall of man and sin entering into the world looked completely different than it looks today. So he goes on to say in verse 21, he's going to talk about this. But with eager hope, this creation, the creation that he's been talking about, it looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. He's talking about time again. Right now, things are broken. Right now, things are fallen. Right now, there's problems in the world. Right now, there's death and there's decay. But there's something better happening, but it's in the future, and you've got to wait for it. You really don't have a whole lot of options. You can't turn the clock ahead on God's timeline. And creation is suffering through this whole thing right now. And he talks about the decay in there. Just think, if there wasn't decay, dentists would only have to work one day a week cleaning teeth. Are you with me on that one? That'd be great, wouldn't it? Doctors wouldn't work as much. There would be no need for big hardware stores. I mean, all of that kind of stuff. You wouldn't have to go to the fitness center to work out because you just look buff all the time. We're all subject to decay because we're a part of that creation. He goes on to say in verse 22, we know that all creation has been groaning in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. How many of you this morning, I'm just kind of curious, this will give away your age a little bit here. How many of you, when you got up this morning, groaned? Just to show a hand. Anybody here? Okay, you're never going to admit that. But if you're married, your spouse groaned. Anybody? Any groaners here? Like, we all groan. We all groan. If you groan when you wake up in the morning, isn't that incredible? All you did was sleep. You were laying still all night long. Why should you groan in the morning? It's because you're over 40. That's why. See? So it just goes on. But he says there's a beginning to this, and there's a present time to this. And it's almost as if a mother is pregnant. In the beginning of that pregnancy, there is no pain in the beginning of the pregnancy unless there's morning sickness. But the birth pangs that come along with that whole thing. And creation, if you look at the world and things that are going on today, you can turn on your news and there's all kinds of talk about things that are happening globally. I mean, if they want to talk about global warming, if they want to talk about floods and earthquakes and droughts and fire and windstorms and all that kind of stuff, listen, creation is groaning. Creation's been affected by the curse. And even so, the elements around us can feel the effects of the curse that are going on there. Verse number 23, he goes on, and we believers, now he's talking to people who are Jesus followers. He's not talking to people who have not yet made a decision to follow Jesus. He says, we believers, we also groan. I'm going to pause right there and say this. This is where I said at the beginning, we don't get a pass on this whole thing. We're affected by the fall too. We've said yes to Jesus. We've said yes to Jesus, but we also groan. We also go through difficulties in life. We also have challenges in our life. We also suffer with acne and cellulite. And are you with me on that? It doesn't matter if you're Christian or not. When you say yes to Jesus, your skin doesn't automatically clear up. It's just a reality. It's where we go. So we groan too, even though we have the Holy Spirit within us as a foretaste of future glory. The moment you say yes to Jesus, God's Holy Spirit fills you and seals you and says, you're mine. I've promised that I'm coming back to get you. And something changes on the inside of us. And suddenly the sky looks bluer, the grass looks greener, and average people look better. I'm just saying. Something goes on inside of us. It's because the Spirit of God has given us this brand new life. We're not exempt from the pain and the difficulty, but when we say yes to Jesus, and I think this is why I want to be a Jesus follower, because I know that life is hard whether you're a believer or an unbeliever, but at least as a believer, I've got a hope and there's a context and there's a reason to endure the pain because something better is coming. I have a hope that I possess, and we're going to talk about it in just a moment when we talk about heaven. It just gets better and better, but it's nothing compared to what's coming. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But we've got a fight on our hands. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you already know this. You know that the moment you say yes to Jesus, you just know that you're going to have a fight on your hands, and it's a fight against something that we call sin. That suddenly you go, you know what, I need to stop doing that. And wherever you dig in your heels and say, I'm not going to do that anymore, now the fight begins. And so Paul addresses that. Look what he says in the rest of verse 23. Look, we long for our bodies to be released from sin and suffering. Your body, let me say it this way, your soul is tethered or anchored to this physical body. Your soul, the essence of who you are, this thing that is rejuvenated and renewed by the Spirit of God, does not want to sin against God anymore. But how many know that your body wants to rebel against God? How many know that there's things that your body wants to do that your spirit that's in love with Jesus doesn't want to do? And we've got a fight on our hands. And the fight is this: I've got to fight temptation. I don't know about you, but I fight temptation every waking moment of the day. And we're going to fight temptation until we take our last breath. It's a fight on our hands. And I think that's one of the appealing things about getting home and getting to heaven. When we're in the presence of Jesus, there's no more fighting temptation. There's no more fighting sin. That's because we're at home and we can rest in that place. But while I'm in this physical, mortal body, I've got a fight on my hands. We fight it. We fight it. I have the biggest fight every time we go to a grocery store and walk by the donut section. Are you with me on that? Like there's a fight. My wife's in front of me, go, no, and it's a fight on our hands. And then there's suffering as well. People die. People get in car accidents. People get diagnosed with cancer. People divorce. People betray. People are unfaithful to their spouses. Our parents divorce. Our parents fight. There's suffering. And that's why I can't wait to get home. The end of verse 23, he says, you know what, we too, along with creation, he talked about creation. Now we too, along with creation, we have this eager hope for the day when God will give us our full rights as adopted children, including the new bodies that he's promised. He's saying, you know what, God adopted you. He adopted you before he even knew what you would become. God adopted you long before you were even conceived in your mother's womb. He wanted relationship with you. And when we get home, we get the full rights as adopted kids. We're not a foster child. We're not an orphan. We're an adopted kid. The will is read to us, and we inherit it all. We get it all. And God says, everything that I have, it's yours. You get the full rights. And then the other thing about getting home to heaven, you see the last part? We get new bodies as well. How many are with me on that one? I'm pretty sure, guys, just for the men, he's going to use my body as the template. I'm just telling you, all right? That's where it's at. Just want to know if you're still here. Verse number 24. Thank you. I hear that. Amen. I love it. We were given this hope when we were saved. Saved from what? Saved from the destruction that's coming to this fallen world when God judges it and he burns it and destroys it and starts all brand new and fresh again. We're saved from that. We all hope for something better in the future. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the future glory to come, it could be a mean time because we're just going through the stuff of life on this earth. He says in verse number 25, but if we look forward to something that we don't yet have, we've got to wait patiently and confidently. I mean, really, you don't have a whole lot of choice, do you? You have to wait patiently for it. And patiently just means this: I will endure and I will go through whatever it is I'm asked to go through. And we wait for it patiently and confidently. I've not been to heaven. I've not seen heaven. I don't know what heaven looks like. I don't know what I'm going to hear when I get to heaven. But I know there's a heaven, and I know that I'm going to be there one day. And I hope all of you are there with me as well. I just know it's going to come. And we wait for it patiently and confidently. What an amazing age that we live in today. With your phone in your hand, no matter where you are, as long long as you've got cellular service or a Wi-Fi service, you can order something. You can go to Amazon or your favorite store online and you can order something, and then not long afterwards they send you notification, it's on its way. And you pick up your phone and you're checking it all the time. Where is it? Oh, it's in Memphis. It's in Detroit. It's in Chicago. It's somewhere, and it's coming. And you can go to your friends and you can hold up your phone and go, look, I ordered something and I know that it's coming. Well, you can do the same thing with your Bible. You can hold it up to your friends and say, I ain't seen heaven yet. I don't know when it's going to come, but I know it's coming because I've ordered it and it's on its way and I'm waiting for it patiently. Now, we be honest for a minute? It's so easy, though, to get focused on the here and now instead of the then and there, because you know what? On the way to church today, some of you had a discussion in the car. You had screaming kids in the back seat. They spilled their juice all over the seat. There was a fight last night, a fight this morning. You're dealing with an unfaithful spouse, an empty bank account, the loss of a job, a diagnosis, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's really hard sometimes to think about the future when there are so many things that create suffering and difficulties right here, right now, right today as we're sitting here. I understand that. And the guy, Paul, who is writing this letter to the Romans, Paul knew what bad days were like. Paul knew what bad days were like. Paul was the guy that wanted to kill Christians because he just was so against them, and then he has this amazing conversion experience. And now Paul, he starts telling other people about Jesus, and not everybody was excited to hear about Jesus. So in one of the cities he goes to preach Jesus, they start throwing rocks at him to kill him. And they assumed him to be dead because they'd thrown so many rocks at him, and they just left him outside the city to die. But God did not let that happen. There was other times when Paul was shipwrecked, Paul was imprisoned, Paul was beaten, Paul was persecuted. I mean, if anybody knew what a bad day was like and knew what suffering was like in this life, it's this guy named Paul. And so I think what Paul says to us in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and 5 has some credibility, because if anybody knew what a bad day was like and knew what suffering was like and knew what temptation was like, it was this guy named Paul. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, Paul says this, look, our present troubles, look at the tense he uses here. Our present troubles, this meantime, are small and won't last very long. He's looking ahead to something in the future. Our present troubles are small and they won't last very long. But isn't it true that when you're in the midst of the most difficult time in your life, it doesn't seem small and it seems like it's going to last forever? And so Paul, he's got to draw back and say, hey, guys, let me just redirect your attention for a little bit. Let me remind you of something that maybe because of crisis you have forgotten about. There's something better coming. And when it comes, it's going to be so much better, you're going to forget about what you're going through right now. Verse number 17, he says, you know what? These troubles that we go through, they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them all, and it's going to last forever. What do you mean by that, Paul? What's this glory? Well, he's talking about home. He's talking about heaven. He's talking about being in the presence of God Almighty, in there with Jesus, with all the other people that have said yes to Jesus and been gathered up to heaven, where there's this incredible time of rest and worship to Jesus and a whole new lifestyle and it's just going to be an incredible place. I heard the story, there was somebody in our community that just went, he passed from this life to the other one just a couple of weeks ago. And the family told us that in the last moments of life, he just sat up on his bed, held up his hands, and just declared, it is so much more beautiful than anything you could imagine. I think God was already just opening the door and letting him peek inside to see what was ahead. It's a reality. It's a place for us to go. He says, look, there's a reason that we go through these troubles and these difficulties right now, but it's not realized yet. It's some place called heaven. We don't talk about heaven a lot, so I'm here to kind of redirect your attention and your thoughts about heaven. And that's what Paul says in verse 18. Look, we don't look at the troubles that we can see right now. Oh, yeah, we do. Pastor, I could tell you in detail all the problems that I have right now. That's not what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, look, you can focus on your problems. You can have a pity party if you want to. You can focus on all the things that are not right in your life, but I don't want you to do that. You need to redirect your attention. Look, it's not the problem. It's not that the problems aren't there. We have to intentionally redirect our focus and our attention on what is not yet. I know you're in the meantime right now. I know there was a beginning to your problem. You're in the meantime, but there's going to be an end one day, and it might end in this life, and it might not end until the next life. So you have to purposely redirect your attention all the time, saying something better is coming. He says in the rest of that verse, rather we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. That's kind of hard to do, isn't it? Paul says, look. Do you see that with me? Do you see it? Just look right there. What are you looking at? It's right there. Don't you see it? I don't see anything. Well, it's there. I remember going with a guy years ago. I'm just a young man, early 20s. I'm out in eastern Montana, and there was a guy out there that I met. His name was Rob, and Rob loved firearms. He loved his guns, and he bought a brand new gun. He wanted to show me his gun. So we drove out in his little Jeep out into the prairies of eastern Montana. Sun had already set. You could barely see the grass in the prairie. And he pulls out his gun, loads up the clip, puts it inside, and he goes, shoot. I said, Rob, at what? There's nothing out there. It's pitch black. He says, well, here. And he turns on his headlights, and there's a rock pile out there. See that? Yeah. Shoot it. Shuts off his light. Like, I can't see it. Just shoot. Sometimes we've got to do that with heaven. I don't see it. Paul says, you need to fix your gaze on that. Look at the thing that you can't see, because the things that we see now, the divorce, the diagnosis, the difficulties, the challenges, the fights, the financial problems, the world crisis, coronavirus, I don't care what it is. He says the things that we see right now, they're soon going to be gone. Soon. It's a time element. One day, in comparison to the whole expanse of time, it's all going to be gone. But the things that we can't see, he's talking about heaven, is going to last how long? Forever. Kind of like signing up to be in a service with Life Church. It's forever, right? Okay. Time is experienced so differently for all of us, isn't it? All of us experience time differently. When you get older, they just fly by. When you go on vacation, the days go by quickly. When you get a phone call from the doctor, or you hear about your bank or your job, or you hear about your spouse or something going on in the crisis in the family, suddenly time slows down exponentially, and it seems like we will never, ever get out of this. This life can just feel like it goes by so slowly, and we say, God, if there's a God, just take away the pain right now. And here's, I just draw back to this, and then we're going to be done in just a moment. We say, Pastor, why doesn't God just take away the pain right now? I don't know. But I know that God is not a cruel God. He's not an unfeeling God. And because you're in the midst of pain does not mean that God is looking at you differently. If you're a parent in this place today, you understand this a little bit. Look, something happens to your child, and you rush your child to ER. You don't take your child to the ER while they're in the midst of their physical and emotional crisis and then just drop them off and go do some shopping. You stand there with them. You weep with them. You pray over them. And if you could take away the pain from them, you would, because you love your child. And because they're in the midst of this crisis doesn't mean you think any differently about them. I don't know why the things happen, but I know this, that God is always standing there with us. I know that there's a context for pain when we're a follower of Jesus. There's a beginning, there's a meantime, and there's going to be an end. God has your life in his hands. And listen, if you want to intentionally rebel against God, he'll let you pay the consequences. But there are times when we just go through stuff in life, I don't know why it happened. But God is there with you. And there's a future. And the future will answer all of the whys of this life only when we get there. I don't know if it'll really matter so much. And we go back to Romans chapter 8. And in Romans chapter 8, Paul kind of finishes out his letter, because I think he really knew where people were at and what they were feeling. He says in Romans chapter 8, verse number 31, he says, what are we going to say about all the wonderful things like these? He's talking about the future glory. He says, here's my big conclusion. What are we going to say? How should we sum things up? If God is for us, who could ever be against us? The answer to that is no one. Verse number 35, can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean that he no longer loves you if we have trouble or calamity or if we're persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? No! God is still loving you the same as he always loved you. Finally, verse 37, he says, no, in spite of all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Jesus Christ who loved us. Finally, in verse 38, I'm convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. It doesn't mean your circumstances mean that God has changed the way he looks at you. In a moment, we're going to partake together in communion, and I just want you to know this. I just want you to know this. That Jesus elected for pain because he knew something better was going to come from it. Jesus elected for pain when he went through the persecution of the religious leaders, when his beard was plucked out, when he was whipped, when his hands and feet were nailed to that cross and he hung there. He elected for that pain because he knew something better was going to come. And that's exactly the case for us this morning. Jesus elected the pain for us because he knew something better was coming. Could you just imagine how different life could look for you if you said, you know what, I know God. In spite of what I'm feeling and facing right now, I know there's a reason for the things I'm going through. Imagine if you could just see the world through the lens of God's future glory for you and what he has planned for you. Listen, church. This life is one day it's going to be over for all of us. It's kind of an amazing thing here. All of us in this room have a 100% chance of dying. And we get to choose our destination. Is it in the presence of God? We're in the presence of God. We go, it was worth it all. I'm so glad I did this. Or is it in the absence of God in a place called hell?